Hello everyone, this is Matteo, and today I'm going to give the line "These are not the droids you are looking for" a new meaning. I bought C3 and R2 kits something like 5 years ago, and I always wanted to do something special with them. And then I had this idea of swapping the paint jobs, and I thought it would make for a fun what if diorama. So I started with C3. It's a very fun build, very easy to assemble. Most of the plastic is gold plated, making it super simple to paint if you want to keep the original paint job. Basically, you just need to add weathering on top of the gold plating. But of course I'm going for a completely different color scheme, so I will have to go through the standard priming and painting process. So technically all the pieces snap in without the need of glue, but I am an old school modeler and if I don't use glue I feel a little uncomfortable. Unfortunately the plastic cement doesn't weld the plating, so I have to sand and file all the pieces where I want to apply glue, and it's a long and tedious process that wouldn't be really necessary. I was also considering adding LEDs to the eyes, but I knew this was going to be a long project, so I prefer to keep it simple. So the kit is a fun, quick build. The quality is great. I wouldn't expect anything less from Bandai, but the plastic turned out to be brittle. I thought it was a problem only with C3 because maybe of the plating process, but it also happened with R2, and I had the plastic cracking in some places, which is very nasty. You will see later in the video. I don't know if it is because I stored them maybe not too well. I went through a moving a few years ago, so I had to store all my model kits for a period in a place that maybe wasn't super dry. But I have other model kits that didn't have this problem, so I don't know exactly what is going on here. Later in the video you will see what happened and maybe you can help me understand what I did wrong. So with C3 out of the way, it's time to move on to R2. In the box there are actually two droids, but we are going to need only one. The other will go directly into the scrap box. The kit is as good as C3, very fun, quick build. It also doesn't need glue, but I used glue because of reasons. But again, the plastic turned out to be brittle. I don't know if it is an isolated issue, but be careful. Okay, let's talk about Star Wars. Everyone has an opinion about anything on internet nowadays, so this is mine. To me, there's only one Star Wars, and that is the original trilogy. I know, hear me out before flipping the table. There are great designs in the movies that came later, especially in the prequels. I really like the design of the Jedi Starfighter ship. I've also built a model kit of that, and probably the Darth Maul combat scene is one of the best lightsaber fighting scene in the whole Star Wars universe. But still, nothing that came out later moved me emotionally like the original trilogy did. That doesn't mean that I cannot appreciate the new franchise because it's objectively amazing, I just don't feel a connection. And I believe that's precisely the point. When I see the passion of the fans for the new releases and cosplayers spending months building their Mando costume, I really understand that to them modern Star Wars is as important as it was the old one to me. There is one thing though that I don't like about each and every new release. In the original Star Wars, we had a whole layer of storytelling narrated even unconsciously through details and props. This made-up universe felt believable because C3 had a gold body but a silver leg, or because they drink blue milk on Tatooine. Why is it blue? Do they add something to it, and why? Is it dangerous otherwise, or the animal just makes blue milk? And also, how can Han understand Chewie? Why are they such good friends? How do they meet? And what is the Kessel Run? Why is it important? And so on and so forth. All these details help building a world in your head, and they only work if they are not explained. The sin of modern Star Wars, in my opinion, is that they are trying to explain the lore when what they are actually doing is impoverishing it. But anyway, it's all good because that universe is in my heart by now and cannot be destroyed. What do you think about it? Okay then, enough ranting and let's get back to our droids. I need to prime C3. To do that I need to remove some of the plating first, so I'm using a sanding sponge to remove some of the gold. So I primed everything off camera and now I'm airbrushing some white over it. I'm using mostly Tamiya colors for this project, except for the metallic paints that are from Vallejo. I really like the metal color line of paints from Vallejo, even though the gold is not great, but I wasn't able to find a nice gold from any brand. Maybe you know of a good gold paint. Next is masking and then applying the second color, which is of course blue. And then I can make all the corrections and all the hard to reach spots with a hand brush. Tamiya colors are actually very good with a brush when thinned with the X20A thinner. The trick is to use very diluted paint and thin layers. The head is silver instead, so I'm applying a black primer first and then the chrome paint from Vallejo. All the pieces are painted, so all left to do is to assemble our C3 with R2 paint job. It was quite a relief to see it all together, because I wasn't sure this color scheme would actually work. I was afraid it would look like a Scoop Ahoy employee, but instead it came out great and weathering will make it better. I gave it a thick coat of glossy varnish first, and then when fully cured I applied some paneline from Tamiya, which is basically very thinned down enamel paint, and this stage will enhance all the details of the model. Unfortunately, this is when the cracking started. I'm not sure if the enamel paint reacted with the plastic. It also happened with R2 when I was applying the panel line from Tamiya. But anyway, the plastic started to crack and explode almost in some spots, and it was very frustrating. But anyway, I was able to fix everything with super glue, and then I tried to cover all the scenes with the oil paints weathering. After all, this is Star Wars, so some battle damage is understood. Next step is weathering with oil paints. This is the technique that I prefer. It is very enjoyable, very relaxing. Oil paints are very forgiving. You can fix any mistake with just some white spirit. And it's a very creative phase. You can basically draw the effect you are after. I'm using orange for rust and brown for dirt, and then green and black for oil and grime. And finally, I'm adding some pigments, concentrating on the feet and the legs and some of the lower torso to simulate that nasty Tatooine sand. Now it's the turn for R2. This will be mostly gold as it is getting the C3 paint job. I'm starting with a black base coat, then I'm adding a very light chrome layer, and finally the gold on top. To add some visual interest, I'm adding some pure chrome details here and there to the otherwise completely gold model. And then it gets the same weathering process as C3, enhancing the details with panel lining and then oil paint weathering and finally pigments. When I added the enamel again, the plastic started to crack, and this time in even more random spots. I thought the problem was the rubber pieces inside the joints, but the cracks actually happened a little bit everywhere, even where there was no rubber. So I'm really out of ideas here. Anyway, again, some super glue and a lot of weathering, and all the scenes are forgiven. On the feet, R2 has two wires. The plastic ones provided cracked again. So I cut two small pieces of guitar strings and made some new, actually better wires for the feet. and it's finally time to work on the base. When building dioramas, I tend to use any scrap material I have around, so you will see me using a lot of different materials. This is probably not the best way of doing it. I'm sure there are specific modular materials that are better and easier to use, but this is a great way of using leftovers, so I'm going to call it environmental conscious model making. So I started with 2 pieces of plywood glued together, then I cut a hole for the door and used some styrene for the frame, and then with a thicker piece of styrene I made the actual door and added some details to the otherwise completely flat surface. On the sides of the door I 3D printed some pieces that are often seen on Tatooine. I 3D printed them instead of just cutting some styrene because they are not square, they have a kind of a pillow shape, so I thought that 3D printing would be easier. Before painting I applied a thick layer of Mr. Surfacer with a brush to add some texture because the styrene is very flat. I'm adding more details until I'm happy. This is an additional frame that I think it was needed, made in balsa wood. Then I covered everything with white glue and a ceramic powder to protect the wood and have a stronger grip for the paint. And finally started painting the door with acrylic colors. I used this very nice, very deep purple mixed with some orange that will create a nice contrast with the floor and the walls that will be mostly yellow. For the doorbell I actually used a piece that I had from an old Millennium Falcon kit, so I guess all comes together at the end. For the wall I used a specific terrain product from AK Interactive. It's basically just white glue and sand mixed together, but it's very convenient. You just add the color that you want and it is ready to use. I added a lot of water to make it easier to spread on the surface. And for the ground I wanted a different texture. I wanted it to be more sandy, so I used what you generally use to make snow in dioramas, and I think that the end result was fine. I also added some rocks here and there to make the ground less boring, and I painted everything with this ochre, similar to what I used for the wall. I'm painting it afterwards just because I forgot to add the paint into the mixture that I used on the ground. For the weathering I just used very diluted acrylic paints. It's just a matter of adding layers until you are happy with the result. At the end I thought that I was missing something on the top part of the diorama, so I made some wires and added them to the wall. More finishing touches, and you are never happy with the result, but at some point you have to call it done. And at the end I think that it came out pretty nice. So time for the glamour shots. Thanks for sticking with me so long. I hope you enjoy the content of this video of mine, and see you next time. Ciao.